All right, right now I am in the process of finding venues and negotiating contracts for 8 different events. So I thought this would be the perfect opportunity for me to hop on, share what I'm going through right now, and some of my tips, tricks, and best practices to this process. So the first thing, most important, is knowing when to start. The earlier you start, the more power you have, the more options you'll have, and the more negotiating power you'll have. The minimum that I would suggest is 4 months. But again, the earlier you can plan, the more flexibility you're going to have, the more options you're going to have, and the more likely you're going to be able to get the venue that you want with all of the pricing that is in your budget and all of the concessions that you are looking for. Keep in mind, if you are planning a 1-day event versus a 3-day event, it's probably going to be a little bit easier if you start a little bit later. If you're planning even a 2-day event, even a 1-day event that has 100 plus people, you're gonna wanna start earlier. The longer your event, the more attendees you're planning on, the earlier you're gonna wanna start. A good rule of thumb is really, I said 4 months minimum. I would suggest 6, and I would suggest, honestly, I book venues for clients that are a year out. Some of my clients were already looking at dates for 2021 because they know that they're having a 2 or 3 day event that is going to have 700 people. That's going to require a lot of space for a duration. So those are just couple of things to keep in mind as far as timing. When you're ready to start, you need to be super, super clear on what it is that you want. What are your dates? What is your budget? How many rooms are you going to need? And I'm talking meeting space rooms, not necessarily hotel sleeping rooms. How many rooms are you going to need? What are those rooms layout going to look like? Are you going to be classroom style? Are you going to be theater style? Are you having banquet tables? What about your AV set? Are you having a large stage with backdrop and truss and lighting? Those are all things you have to think about because that's going to take up square footage in the rooms that you're looking at. You need to know, what kind of food and beverage are you serving? Are you doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Those are spaces you're going to need. Are you just doing snack breaks? Are those going to be in the room? Are those going to be in pre-function space? All those types of things are super important to be clear on when you start looking at venues. So when you look at venues, I use a couple of different technologies that allow me to enter my information, select the hotels or this is not necessarily all hotel. Right now I am in deep hotel mode. All 8 of these events are taking place at hotels. So, but it allows you to go in and pick all of the different areas, hotels, venues that you want, and en masse send what they call an RFP, a request for proposal, to those venues. Now, I am super crystal clear on everything that I know goes into the event, but when I'm providing this information to the venues, I don't give them everything they need to know. I give them enough information to pique their interest in the fact that they want to talk to me and see what my business is all about. And what that does for me is I'm able to blast this out to, dozens of properties. And then they reply back, usually within the same day, saying we'd like to speak with you or we need additional information. But what that does is that gives me the contact's name, their phone number, and their email. So I didn't have to spend time going to each individual venue's website, calling, finding out who their banquet manager is or their event captain, and working through all of that. But at that point, I don't respond to the email. I pick up the phone and I call them. This day and age, everybody wants to conduct business over email, and it definitely will work in your benefit if you can create that personal connection. So pick up the phone, have a conversation. If they don't answer, then follow up with the email. But in that conversation, I obviously introduce myself and I explain a little bit more about the event. The events that I plan are all for really purpose-driven, mission-focused entrepreneurs for the most part. So their events are having a massive impact on the attendees. So I enroll the people who are going to be writing this proposal that I'm going to be negotiating with, I enroll them in the vision for this event and the impact it's going to make. It kind of tugs on their heartstrings, and a lot of times it works in your benefit if they have a better understanding and can relate to the purpose of the event. So also be clear, if you're a planner, on what your client's purpose is. If you're doing this on your own, be ready to articulate what that what is the why of your event and what impact is it going to have? For those of you that are planning your own events, even if you don't have access to the different technologies that a planner might have, reach out, let me know. I'd be happy to send you a couple of resources that you can use for free to send out this information. After I hang up the phone with them, at that point I go through all of the details. I kind of walk through the flow of the event, the different food and beverage, what the event feels like, what the room set is going to be, the experience that I want my attendees to have. And then I follow up with an email that has that big document that I talked about earlier in the process that has all of the details, except for one thing. I never, ever, ever, and they will ask, and it's okay to say no. It's okay to just say, we haven't figured that out yet. We're at the very preliminary stages. It doesn't matter. Do not give up your budget on that first round. If you give up your budget, if you say your budget's $20,000, you're going to come back with an all-in quote for $19,500. So don't give up your budget. But after that call, follow up with the email, put everything in writing. That is a rule of thumb. When you are talking contracts, when you are talking, proposals, everything in writing, because it allows you to go back to that, obviously. And there's times that I have, spoke with somebody who says, oh yeah, well, we'll do this, that, and the other. I have it in writing because when I get the proposal, those things might not be included. And then I'm like, remember when we spoke about this? And you send that over. And then I also, a lot of times I will create a space diagram. It's not to scale ever, but it kind of shows the room layout. Are you looking at, like I talked earlier, theater seating, classroom style, but am I envisioning it, in a rectangle where the space is going to be wide, or am I envisioning it with the stage at the front of the room and more rows going back? Giving them that material, that kind of vision will save you time on the back end when you're going back and forth. So while you're waiting for them to create your proposal, it's important for you to level set your own expectations and really understand what the value of your meeting is and what your booking power is. And what I mean by that is there's a couple of different components when working with venues that go into the value of your event and what they're willing to do for you. So I talked about earlier the booking window. And obviously, if you are within 6 months, you have more power. You have the time to pick and choose. The venues know that you're looking at other properties that likely have availability. So they're going to want to produce the most competitive bid for you. Another thing is date flexibility. If you have not booked your speakers yet, or you don't, if you have flexibility on your dates, that opens up the potential for you to have a little bit more opportunity to get better rates. So flexible dates, better rates. The way that these venues work is they are trying to fill these holes. So if they have an event that is taking up their meeting space, Monday through Wednesday, you're saying that your event is Friday through Sunday. If you're able to, back that up one day, Thursday through Saturday, they want that business and they want to fill that gap. So they're going to produce a more competitive bid so that they have no gaps in their space. Something else that really goes hand in hand is your food and beverage minimum. A lot of hotels, they require you to spend a certain amount in food and beverage before they will comp the meeting space. One of the things I hate is paying for meeting space rentals. You're paying for nothing. So, I'm always looking to, if I have to, increase my food and beverage minimum so that I get the rooms covered for free get the room fees waived, at which point you then at least you might be spending the same amount or even a little bit more, but at least you have something to show for that. And then the last thing is your space to rooms ratio. And this is only dependent if you're hosting at a hotel. But the more room nights that you're guaranteeing them, the more they're going to come down on that food and beverage or waive room rentals as well. So if you're taking up 3 days of meeting space for 100 people each, and you're able to say, well, we guarantee at least 40 rooms over the duration, that's going to give you more power as well. So that's just a kind of way for you to understand your booking power, understand the value of your event from the venue side, so that when you get your proposal, you're able to look at it in a realistic manner, and then start your process of negotiating. So one of the best, so I finished reading this book. It's called Never Split the Difference. It is by a former FBI hostage negotiator. His name is Chris Voss. If you haven't read that, I highly recommend reading it. Now, obviously, this is hostage negotiations, and that's a much more intense situation than negotiating venue contracts. But the nuggets that are in there, I cannot even begin to tell you the night and day difference that I have seen. And just a couple of those, the best nugget that I took from that book is the phrase, "Now how am I supposed to do that?" You say that when you're talking with them, and then you pause. The value of that pregnant pause and that question, because then it gets their brain thinking about, well, how is she supposed to do that? And how are they supposed to do that? And something else, and this is something that I struggle with, and I actually have a Post-it note on my board right in front of my desk that reminds me of this, is low and slow. When you're having these conversations, keeping a calm, unemotional, low, slow voice will work in your benefit. Chris Voss calls it the late night radio DJ voice. So that's just something else to keep in mind. And then everything that you discuss, again, follow up in writing. So some of the things with negotiating is that you can negotiate everything. Everything is negotiable, and keep that in mind. Everything's negotiable when you are working within the space window and you have the power. So, and also you don't know if you don't ask. So I've had things built in where, right before I sign the contract, I want to throw in a spa package for the people that are hosting the event, and they'll throw that in. That's something that people might not always think about to do. Some of the most common things that event planners know to look for, and for those of you that are doing this on your own, I want to kind of give you an idea, is if it's at a hotel, is attrition, and that is those rooms that you're guaranteeing. So let's just, if you're guaranteeing 100 rooms per night, the hotel will have a clause in there that it's 100 rooms at 80% attrition. So that basically means that if you don't fill, if your attendees don't book, that basically what that means is you're responsible for paying for 80% of those rooms. So obviously, in most cases, your attendees are paying for their rooms. However, if you only book 75 rooms, you still are responsible for paying for that other 5%. That attrition clause, the 20%, is negotiable. You can get that down. You can, if you know for a fact that you will fill X number of rooms, you can increase it and say, we'll guarantee 10% attrition. We will cover 90% of all of those rooms we're guaranteeing, and that will give you a little bit more flexibility in that as well. Obviously, you can add in, you can ask for upgrades, you can ask for breakfast, discounted parking, spa packages, like I meant earlier, different perks and things like that. Some other things that, a lot of events these days have moved to a cash bar, and most venues will not include that in your contract, but you can state that the cash bar revenue goes against your food and beverage minimum. So right there, you have other people's money helping you to hit your food and beverage minimum. So looking at my list, those discounts on audio visual, complimentary internet, those are other huge, budget line items. At hotels specifically, the audiovisual is ridiculous. The fees are astronomical, and you can work discounts in there. They can put a line item in there for, we'll do it for this many days, and then we'll comp this many days. We'll give you a flat 20% off. Whatever you negotiate, you have the power to negotiate AV, even when they tell you that it's handled by a third-party AV provider that is in-house. Just rule of thumb, if you don't know, you don't ask. And remember, when you're asking for those things, they're like, no, we're going to have to charge you X thousands of dollars for this audio video package. That's when you respond back, well, how am I supposed to do that? I'm already spending this much on food and beverage and filling so many rooms. How am I supposed to do that? And I'm telling you, it works. I have been blown away. I have had contracts where it has been an $85,000 food and beverage minimum. I walk through the flow of the event that we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing that. how am I supposed to hit that number? How am I supposed to do that? And it works, I'm telling you. So, okay, now, those are just different things that you can negotiate, but now I want to go into the really important part, and this is where the real legal stuff comes in. This is where you have the most risk, and there's 3 specific clauses in contracts. These clauses are what cause you potentially the most risk, and in contracts contracts are written to protect the party that is writing the contract. So when I look at contracts, they're so one-sided, and it's important to negotiate the clauses that it's important to negotiate the clauses that it's fine that they're in there to protect the hotel, but I always want to make sure that my client is protected as well. And so those 3 main clauses are termination, cancellation, and indemnification. So starting with indemnification, this basically indemnifies my client or you if you're hosting the event against legal action. Doesn't happen, but if it's not in the contract, protect yourself. It's your insurance policy, right? So say, for example, they, were washing the floors. They forgot to put up the little, yellow that says caution wet floor, and somebody slips, falls, breaks their ankle. Well, that should not be a liability on you. That should be a liability on the hotel. So you want to make sure that clause is there, because a lot of times it'll say that the hotel holds no responsibility, that the group holds the responsibility. So I always redline that out and change the terminology there. So that's your indemnification clause. Next clause is termination, and it's frequently referenced as force majeure. So this is saying that if for some reason this contract has to be terminated due to unforeseen circumstances outside of your control, if there's a hurricane, if there's a threat of terrorism, if things that are outside of my client's control and things that are outside of the hotel's control. And that's fine. And that clause is in there, and it's going to be in there every single time. But what's important to look for there is a lot of times there is that fine print that says, yes, it's okay to terminate, but only if the venue specifically is affected. So say, for example, you're planning a conference and half of your attendees are coming in from out of town. There's a threat of terrorism at the hotel or at the airport. Well, because the hotel is still open, they're still available, they still have the staff, and they have the capacity to host your event, that clause would not protect you. But it would have a massive impact on the success of your event if half of your attendees aren't able to come in. So make sure that it does not specifically outline that it has to involve the venue. Another thing that is commonly seen in force majeure or the termination clause is a strike. And especially with hotels, convention centers, union strikes are common. It does happen, but one of the things that it says is even if it includes the hotel's employees. So if you're planning something at a hotel and their own employees are on strike, that will allow them to terminate your contract. So that's another item that's a non-negotiable. That gets redlined out, and usually it's not a problem. They write these contracts as ironclad as they possibly can to protect the venue. And it works in their favor because not everybody knows to look for these things and redline them out. So again, if you don't know, you don't ask. And always make sure the last one comes into cancellation. So what if you cancel the conference? Sometimes things happen. Strategies change, unforeseen circumstances happen, and you might have to cancel the conference. It has happened, and of course, in doing so, there will be some financial implications that you're going to have to pay. The venue's been holding the space for so long; they were accounting for your business, and they turned down 4 other potential contracts because they were holding this space. So make sure that you look at that clause. Make sure that you are okay with what those terms are. A lot of times they will just say, well, X% of the, if your program is, let's just say $100,000 and you cancel within 30 days, then you owe us X% of $100,000. If you cancel within 2 months, you owe us X percent of $100,000. And some venues will allow you to get flexible with that. And instead of it being X percent of what your event's value is, how about negotiating strategically and talking about profits lost? So you can talk with them and have them provide historical trends of what has their revenue been. Have they been sold out in rooms during that week in previous years? If not, well, then we're going to back out the attrition. So that's a more complicated one for sure. But it is a tactic that you can look at. And most importantly, over any of this, I would say 50% of the contracts that I look at do not have a clause protecting my clients. What if the hotel cancels the contract? Now, this is different from the termination force majeure we just talked about. What if the hotel cancels? It has happened. It's not likely, but it has happened. They could have the potential for a total sold out event, and they bump you because they have that potential for a larger group. Something could happen and they could have to close for renovations. Sometimes they're under new ownership and everything changes. So it's super, super important to have that clause in there that if the hotel cancels for any reason, that you are due back those damages. You can only imagine all of the work that goes into finding a venue, contracting the venue. You've already probably started promoting this. You're starting all over. You're losing time. Attendees might no longer be able to attend if you have to change your dates. So just make sure that under that cancellation clause, you are protected if the venue cancels as well. So just to wrap this up, a couple of best practices, things to keep in mind. Once you get that contract negotiated down, you are ready to sign. Couple of things. I call it the rule of threes. Read, read, and reread. The first thing I do is I go through, y'all saw in the picture yesterday, I have every single color highlighter, every single pen, and I go through a contract 3 to 4 times. The first time I go through it, I am looking only at numbers. I am highlighting every single number, every single financial value that is in there, and I'm doing the math. There are times where it will say, just for easy math, $100 for 5 days per day. And then at the bottom, somewhere in the actual content, in the actual writing, it'll say $700. So make sure you check that math. So that's the first time I go through it, is just for numbers. The second time I go through it, for dates. Dates that the hotel is responsible for things, dates that I'm responsible for things. You can sometimes release rooms. If you see that you are not picking up the number of rooms that you had contracted for, you can release some of those rooms and not be held accountable for them for attrition. So I go through, food and beverage, when those numbers are due, when final head counts are due. There's so many different things that go into a contract and dates. I go through, I look at those dates, I make sure those dates match with everything that were in my RFP, and I have a clear checklist of everything from pricing, when money's due, when deadlines are, everything, so dates. The third time I go through that, this is when I'm really looking at those terms and conditions. Now, keep in mind, I've already gone through it a couple of times because I wanted to make sure that the indemnification, the cancellation, termination, all of those things are in there. But now that we've gone through that, I go through it detail. I mean, reading it with a fine-tooth comb, and I do that a couple of times. Once I am confident that everything is in there before signing, I then go back and compare it to that original RFP. Sometimes this process can take, 8, if you have enough time, it can take, 8 weeks. So there could be something that you had put in that RFP that has slipped your mind since then. So make sure you go back and compare it to that initial list of all of the things that you must have for your event. As you're going through this, track everything. If there's anything that you are redlining out, additions that you're adding, changes that you're making, make sure that you're doing that in some sort of technology where you can redline and track the changes, and expect the people on the other side to do the same. Is way too much work to go back and read every single little thing after you've already read it 3 times. So tracking changes, super, super important. And make sure that the dates, the time, and the space allocation are clearly mapped out. You could have the dates for the 15th through the 17th, which is a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but in the contract it says Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So just double check, triple check. You know, it's a legally binding agreement. So the time you're spending on this front end, while it is, like I mentioned, not glamorous and it can be very tedious and, you know, a lot of work, it is worth it to be protected in the end and save yourself that headache. And then the last thing that I do right before, you know, usually I'm sending these contracts to my clients, they're reviewing it, but I've already gone through the whole process. So they're getting something that, you know, I would say 8 out of 10 times doesn't have to be negotiated. There might be some clauses in there that are sticky points for them based on previous experiences. And so we'll go back and forth. But the last thing I do is I have a 47-point checklist. Yes, 47 points. If you're planning an event and you want me to share this with you, I'm happy to share it with you. Not all 47 points relate to every single contract, but I don't want to be dependent on my memory. I want to go through this checklist that, and it's grown. It hasn't always been 47 points. But I want to go through this checklist, every single thing, and make sure that when I went through this contract, I went through all of those points, that I addressed all of those issues that may arise, every single clause. And it's just that final checks and balances to make sure that nothing was missed, nothing slipped through the cracks. So again, I mean, that's basically a real quick deep dive, what I think was real quick deep dive into the world of venue selection and contract negotiations. I would, you know, if this is something that you're working on your own, I am happy to hop on a call, go into some more detail. Like I said, I am happy to share, you know, whatever documents I have that can help you out. If you're running into any problems if you're in the process, you know, happy to talk through those. I love sharing my experience with you. And, you know, also a lot of times I'm able to learn from you as well. So, you know, I want you to be successful. I want you to, if you're a planner, get the best contracts for your clients. If you're doing your own event, I want you to obviously get the best terms and contracts for yourself. And, you know, I'm happy to help you in any way that I can. So, you know, if you are looking to plan an event and you want to plan the whole thing on your own and you don't want to deal with all of this, let me know. I'm happy to help you out just on that venue selection contract negotiations as well. So thank you guys for hopping on, watching the replay. If you have any questions, if you're watching the replay, #replay, leave your comments below. And for those of you that stuck through this entire thing, thank you. And I apologize for the technical difficulties on the front end here. And I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. So I hope you have a great day and I will talk with you soon.